what I worry about most in this space is the unhealthy relationship slash addiction with.
Tawnee Gibson, so glad to connect with you. We have had a nice timeline together of podcasting every few years and so forth, and we thought that it would be nice to reconnect and kind of discuss with everyone a timeline of our experience in the endurance scene and how things have evolved, and some reflections that you've had. And obviously, things are so different for you now from being deeply immersed in the racing scene to now turning your attention to raising kids and working on your homestead up there in the Pacific Northwest. So let's get into it. Thank you for joining me.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And, I'm just over here in my wool layers right now because our house, we live in a log cabin up in North Idaho now, and our main heating source is a wood stove, and I have my door closed to the office. So it's a bit chilly in here as we are going through, it was a late start to winter up here, but now it's hitting hard and we're having a blizzard right now. So it's just a beautiful day.
So you're from Southern California, and you made this massive relocation after quite a long time on the road on the hashtag van life, doing your thing. What's the experience like, and the extreme difference from where you grew up to where you're settled now with your family?
Well, Brad, as I was telling you before we started recording, I thought that I had it all set, being born and raised in Southern California, growing up a surfer, living the dream of the endless summer, quite frankly. And thankfully, I had a family who was very on board with all that. We would go surfing until it was dark year round, essentially, even when it was cold, and have bonfires afterwards. And, as I grew up and my now husband and I lived in Laguna, I'd go running at dawn before anybody was out on the roads, and run by the beach and run down Main Beach and run up through Heisler Park. And I'd just be like, why would I ever leave this place? This is where people come to vacation. I literally live in paradise, and I have it right out my doorstep. We were renters back then, and we would always try to live as close to the beach as possible. And it was fabulous. But then as I grew and evolved and through my own healing journey, of just like my health and wellness and my relationship with exercise and training, I just started to question things a little bit more. And really the catalyst for we started our van life journey, which was in 2018, and we left California. We'd obviously gone on plenty of trips and vacations throughout each of our lifetimes, but my husband, John, and I left in our van in 2018, and we started living outside of California in this unique format. And it really hit me like, holy moly, there are like so many beautiful places. Like, yes, the beach is fantastic, and SoCal is a very amazing spot with fantastic weather. Just like Ron Burgundy said, like 70 and sunny, like, here we go. It's shocking. It's going to be another beautiful day in SoCal. But there's so many other beautiful places in this country, and we got to experience that on such an intimate level, living and traveling in our van. And it just got like the wheels spinning in our head of like, where do we want to live next? Because maybe like we need to like live this life to the fullest, and living in SoCal for the rest of our lives is not that. And that really also coincided with just like kind of my exit from formal marathon racing and a new chapter in my own exercise and, health and wellness journey as well.
And now that you're on the other side, as I am, having not participated in a triathlon in many decades, you have some important reflections. You do a good job sharing this with your listeners at Endurance Planet, and I'd love to get into some of that, because some of my reflections are pretty strange, and they come into the category of what was I thinking? Why did I do that to my body? I had a PTSD moment at the farmer's market in Kailua, Kona last summer, when it was a nice cloud cover. We're shopping for papayas and mangoes and walking around on the blacktop, and then the clouds parted and the sun beat down onto this blacktop, and I got really hot and I had to go sit down in the shade. And I was sitting there realizing that this is the same time of day that I racked my bike and took off to run 26 miles in this type of weather. And it was, I literally started shaking like, oh my gosh, what the hell was I doing to this poor kid that was out there racing in the pro division and trying to pass people. And I was so tired, I couldn't even shop for papayas. And it was a strange reflection of like, when I got so extreme and deep into that, health was, a discard. There wasn't any concern or reflections about health. It was purely about fitness and speed and performance and competition. And it was a little disturbing to reflect on it on that moment. But I know you've had like sort of some pros and cons yourself with your reflections and your whole journey.
So let me just share I haven't actually had the PTSD moment in Kailua Kona, but as you're describing that, I went to Kona for multiple years on the other side of things from the media standpoint, starting just kind of on my own, like pulling together whatever finances I could to make it out there to get myself in that scene. But one year stands out for me, and I think this was probably 2009 or 10. And it was Thursday, the morning of the Underpants run, because back then it was always on Thursday. There was a very set schedule. And I was still very much like about like the look, as everybody is in Kona. But I mean, I was in a disordered way still in many ways, even though I probably wasn't fully admitting of that at that point. And I remember going out for a swim at Digny Beach that morning before the Underpants run, and I got stung by a jellyfish. And it was really painful. Like, it was like, but I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot miss the Underpants run. And I was in a public bathroom somewhere, trying to put pee on the jellyfish sting and trying to make it to the Underpants run, because God forbid I miss this opportunity. I had to wear like this skimpy little, like, show off the abs and all the muscle outfit. And really, like, I look back at that moment and I was just running on cortisol. Like, who knows if I even ate anything that whole day. I was just pure cortisol, like throwing my adrenals literally in the trash, right? And just that would be like when I went to Kona for a handful of years in the beginning, that was my like whole vibe there. Like, I would go, lucky if I was eating anything really, I'd maybe snack on some macadamia nuts along the way. Definitely probably having cocktails at night at all the parties. And it just was so unhealthy. Yet I was in this place where health was supposed to be like the thing, and like, I've stepped back there since with my, then we had a 6-month-old that we brought to Kona for the Ironman World Championships in 2019, which was great. And obviously it was a completely different vibe and mentality I was in then, but yeah, like, just so relatable. And I think a lot of people, no matter how you kind of were in the triathlon scene, whether it was you as an athlete or me from the media, like, it can really be this like really slippery slope of like, you think you're going in with the right intentions, but in reality, your body is just not thriving. It's not healthy. It really can be a very unhealthy place. And so that's kind of like a tricky thing in my story, where I started off with an eating disorder in 20 years ago. Actually, I just passed the 20-year anniversary of when my eating disorder began, when I was a freshman in college at San Diego State, of course, the birthplace of triathlon. Like, this is all connected somehow. And so this was 20 years ago, and I thankfully was able to get myself out of like the really, really difficult part of the eating disorder relatively quickly. And on one hand, I have to thank finding triathlon for that, because triathlon was this gift to me to say, I need to fuel my body in order to perform. I want to perform. I want to be fit. I want to be healthy. However, what I didn't realize, there's this other segment of, disordered eating that can take place in vulnerable minds like mine was in that era of my life, where the ability to do triathlon and train and swim, bike, and run was one thing, but it was my reason for allowing myself to fuel. Like, in other words, like, I was not comfortable just sitting down with food unless I had been training. Or if I hadn't been training, then I was very, restrictive and controlling over what I did allow going into my body. And it was very reflective in my health at the time. I suffered from amenorrhea for 10 years of my life. I did not have a period. And I'm not recommending this to anybody. I'm very grateful that I came out of that healthy, with good bone density, with the ability to, have thriving fertility and go on to have babies and all, and, normal menstruation. But it was obviously, I was doing things very out of alignment, and I was not nourishing myself, even though you would look at me and be like, she looks like the picture of perfect health and fitness. Like, how could anything be going wrong?
It sounds like your perception is that it's extremely common, rather than, oh, Tawnee, this individual outlier that had some issues with her body image, eating, and all the guilt and the emotions surrounding something simple as nourishing the body and honoring one's appetite.
Absolutely. And that's really the thing, Brad. I mean, even to this day, I think awareness around these things has increased exponentially even in my time. And compassion toward these things. I was still, this era that I'm speaking to right now where it was still a very hush hush, you don't talk about this stuff, I feel like, or at
Mm.
least that was my impression of it. Like the embarrassment and shame I felt around not having a period was like, especially as an up and coming coach and host of a podcast, like God forbid I let anybody know that I had this like secret problem, health problem, dysfunction going on. Now, fast forward to 2024, and I think that we can much more openly have these conversations and support one another rather than shame one another, which is definitely like I had direct experience with being shamed when I tried to speak up in the beginning. And then finally I just said, F it, I need to like share this because I know this is not just me. I know this is a huge community of athletes. And even if you're not a hardcore athlete, like these kinds of health imbalances can happen to your everyday fitness enthusiasts or people who are not even going to the gym. They just have a high stress lifestyle and they're not
Mm.
supporting themselves properly. So it really goes beyond just the athletic world too.
I didn't realize. I thought amenorrhea was directly associated with like extremely low body fat, where you're looking at the CrossFit queen with the six pack or the Olympic runner. But you're saying like a high stress lifestyle can also throw the hormones out of whack, where you might be walking around secretly with this huge dysfunction in your health.
Yeah, so it's really interesting that I can't even tell you how many times in my career I've had women come to me and say, "But my body fat is over 20% and I don't have a period still." And this is where everybody is, even though we have a lot of information and data and specific numbers that are kind of in the space of red S and HPA axis
Mm.
dysfunction and amenorrhea, like there's a lot of data on it, a lot of research that's been done on it. But what I really try to emphasize everybody is that we are all still an N equals one. And what somebody's stressor is not going to be somebody else's. What somebody's set point is. And my set point in this conversation is about what is the point at which you can regain normal hormonal function, normal period, activity, not, going beyond 90 days without a cycle, what you want to get in that window of like 25 to 30-day cycles. What is the point of like body fat, caloric intake, exercise, energy output, what is your secret sauce? And for everybody, it's different. Some, I think back in the day, like in literature, they would say fat percentage of 14% for females is fine. And I've never seen that to be true, honestly. I feel like that to me, it seems like it's usually more in like that at least 18% or so, especially for somebody trying to heal. And for many
Mm.
women, it might be more. And what I've learned through years and years of experience with myself and working with women in this space is that often also in that initial period of recovery, you have to go above and beyond. You have to eat more
Mm.
than you even think you need to on paper, so to speak. You have to gain, I hate to say it, but you have to gain even more weight and body fat in the beginning just to send the proper signaling for hormonal function to like get up and running again. Then eventually, as things are back into more place of homeostasis and we are seeing hormones balance out and normal cycles returning, then you might be able to tweak things a little bit more, experiment with things a little bit more, knowing your boundaries though, like having, good boundaries for yourself of like, don't go too far back into that place where we got ourselves into the trouble or into trouble in the first place. So really, I'm not here to give answers on numbers and equations. It's about also the person, because I do think we are all these energetic beings, and what led to my healing won't necessarily be the same for somebody else, but we can dissect each person's unique N equals one needs analysis to figure out what is their secret sauce, what will work for them. And then they have to want it, of course. I mean, that's the big thing. And that's for 10 years is because I didn't really want to heal yet. And I know that sounds crazy, but I wasn't ready to heal yet. I mean, I wanted to heal. I didn't want to have amenorrhea. It wasn't fun. It was definitely this little like devil on my shoulder saying you have this problem. But at the same time, I wasn't ready to heal. I wasn't wanting the healing process to fully begin. And now at this point, it's been 10 years this year since I've done a triathlon. So, there's been a whole era of my life since then of fertility and wellness and hormones and
Heck
menstruation.
yeah, girl, pumping them out. Got two little kids.
Mm.
Uh, what was holding you back from slamming your head fist on the table and saying, all right, I'm done suffering. I'm going to heal no matter what. You said you were delaying this and dragged it out 10 years when you knew you had a problem, and arguably you knew how to fix it with your knowledge base and your great work with your coaching clients, but something was holding you back.
I was very wrapped up in the scene. I was wrapped up in my role in all of it. And I was very, very much insecure and influenced about other people's opinions of me. So, in that context, I felt like I had to look a certain way and perform a certain way in order to be accepted as a voice on the podcast, as a voice, as a coach, as an expert in the field. And if I strayed from that and allowed myself to, you know, gain weight, go ease up on training, and therefore perform more slowly in races,
Mm.
that wasn't an option for me at that point. I mean, it really wasn't. And I really think it was a combination of factors. It's a really good question you're asking, because it's like, why just not do the thing? And, I think that also speaks to the eating disorder mentality, where people who haven't ever suffered from something like this, they look at a person suffering from an eating disorder and they look, might have a very like understandable question of like, well, why can't they just eat more? Like, is
Mm.
it like as simple as just like eating more? Like, why
Hmm.
is this such a complicated thing? But that's the problem with eating disorders. It's not that simple whatsoever. And I held on to that mentality for until I was ready to really like begin my healing process. Like I reached some breaking points at one point and was like, I'm done with this, is like my state of mind. I also think
Mm.
I was lying to myself and thinking I was doing things that were healthy. I mean, I was very much on that orthorexic spectrum of perfect diet,
Mm.
all those things, fasted training, dabbling with keto diets. At that point, like, let's talk about like, this is even actually kind of in the beginning of my recovery, but like as the keto stuff was becoming more in the forefront, and before we knew that a lot of the research was being done on male athletes, it was a very,
Brutal, man.
right? It was,
Oh, it's so effective for getting lean and mean and going faster and feeling more alert and energetic during the workday. Try it out, ladies.
yeah.
Okay.
So passing on top of that and like do all these things and make sure you're manipulating your carbohydrate intake and like pouring down the fat and blah, blah, blah. And, it sounds very attractive. And at the time, like I took the bait for sure, and did all the things and in the name of health. But deep
Hmm.
down, I probably knew it's like, okay, this is just another way to restrict and control. Let's just be honest. Like this is not from a place of like nourishment. And that is the difference. And so I don't think that keto diets are necessarily always wrong for anyone in the population. We got to do a needs analysis and figure out where is this person at in their life. Generally for female athletes, it's going to be a hard no for me, but there are other women for whom it may be therapeutic intervention, right? Um, there are plenty of women outside of this space who have the opposite problem of being addicted to processed foods and
Mm.
nutritive foods, and for them maybe a keto diet is going to be an aha moment. So we can't just assume that these are hard truths for everybody. But for me, what the difference was that I lived in this state of control and restriction throughout that whole phase of my life of having amenorrhea, and it would all these variables, as I was speaking to insecurities, the desire to look a certain way, the desire to perform a certain way, which is ironic because I'm sure in retrospect I would have had more longevity, better performance, and a lot more success in general, less injuries, you name it, if I had fueled myself properly and had been having a period along the whole way. Hindsight, right?
Yeah, it was great to read. Elise Cranny had a feature article that you can find easily. This is the national champion people in the women's 10,000 meters, and she made an attempt to uh, take off, a couple more percentage of body fat, and plunged into that REDS syndrome, which I'm going to ask you to talk about and describe, and amenorrhea as well. And so here's the Olympic runner who had a performance suffer. She had stress fractures, directly associated with her dietary deficiency, and so she came back strong and performing at a high level right now today. but she had to describe how she had to extricate from that condition, even at the expense of, having an extra pound that the experts might deem, could cost her a medal instead of her fifth place or whatever she is in the world. So that was interesting to me that, like, even when you're an elite runner at the very, very top, it's still a bad idea to get yourself into that deficiency.
Right. And sometimes what I've also learned in this space is that a lot of women, men too, of course, can suffer from this, just different kind of, presentation of it. But we sometimes have to learn the hard lessons for ourselves because let's face it, there's a lot of type A hard-headed athletes in this space. Myself, one of them, you've been one of them. And so sometimes we have to dig ourselves into the ditch in order to see for ourselves, even though we had all the warnings spelled out for us. And that's okay. I mean, that's part of everyone's journey. And I think
Mm,
that's definitely what leads to more self-awareness, empathy for others, our growth journey as humans, really. And so it's not
yeah.
great, but hey, it's part of it.
Yeah, that one's rough. You're hitting me in the stomach now, and I've been reflecting on this where you can kind of get into this mode where you just write everything off as part of your journey and your destiny. But the point of, us recording this freaking podcast is for people to listen and say, hey, look, you don't have to learn the hard way. Tawny can tell you about this decade of her life and the control issues and the things that, you work so hard to let go of, and are sharing your story in hopes that people will wake up before it's too late and say, look, read this article about the Olympic runner who, got herself into a shithole when, she's getting paid large sums of money to run around the track and, cut back on her calories foolishly and plunged into injury and decline. And, what are you all about? What's your goal in this sport? What's your goal with your life? And let's try to avoid the, the roadblocks and the train wrecks. And in my own life, I'm striving to do that, such that I'm going to have a little bit of you know, a chip on my shoulder if I say, hey, it was all part of my journey for me to, crash my bike 10 times because I was too aggressive on downhills. Well, you're an idiot then too, as well as being, learning things through life experience.
That's a good, I really like that because it challenges us in a way and doesn't just give us like the easy out or excuse to say, oh, like you're saying, like this is just part of my destiny and my journey. I like that. And I think it really kind of inspires people to step up to the plate, and
Yeah,
just
yeah. There's, new book out by Robert Sapolsky, noted Stanford professor, called Determine, where he argues that, our lives are entirely self-determined. And it's very controversial because people are saying, well, that means we're all just, predestined by, our place of birth and our circumstances, and we have no choice, and we're going to end up being on death row for being a murderer, or we're going to be, CEO and running for Senate, but you can't do anything about it. And so it's a good conversation fodder, and that's why I brought it up when I'm thinking about the importance of going with the flow and accepting your mistakes and learning from them, and also saying, part of my goal with getting older is to be smarter and learn from all my mistakes and continue to evolve, and avoid the pain and suffering that's unnecessary, especially when we're talking on this subject of, it's hard enough being an endurance athlete. Now you got to make it harder by bringing in these, emotional elements that cause more stress.
right. And and honestly, I think that's where sharing the stories, not just presenting the research, which is valuable too, but sharing the stories, if we can get into some people's minds to prevent them from making this series of decades long of mistakes or years long, whatever it is, then and just I'm so passionate about it and on a space to be able to work with many people as I would ideally want to. So it's podcasts like these and my own Endurance Planet where we can really create like effective conversations and change around this stuff for sure.
I want you to describe what REDS is and what the HPA dysfunction is that you mentioned
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah. So RED-S is relative energy deficit in sport, and it's a newer term, back in the day, which is when I was in grad school, like this was 2009, 2010 or so. So not terribly long ago. And that just shows you, again, the evolution of these things. Even in the last like 10 to 15 years, there's been a huge shift around the terminology and just the inclusion of it. Because back in the day, it was female athlete triad, and that was a very specific, exclusive kind of term where you had to meet certain criteria that not everybody would meet, myself included, yet I was still very dysfunctional. And so thankfully, people in charge of these things decided to redefine this as Red S, relative energy deficit in sport, to include a broader, category of symptoms. Obviously, be more inclusive to male athletes as well, and not just female athletes, and really help kind of pinpoint what can go wrong from a health standpoint that leads to the things we're talking about: amenorrhea, health, poor health outcomes, or and really what it comes down to is this energy balance among other variables. And in addition to that, HPA axis is hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and it's kind of like the more intricate terminology than just saying like adrenal fatigue, or everybody's like throwing that term around like adrenal fatigue this, and my adrenals are so burnt out and all this kind of stuff. There's obviously a lot of controversy or claims of pseudoscience around these terms. But at the end of the day, HPA axis function is a very real thing. It's signaling from the brain that leads downstream to all these hormonal effects and other things. And when we have too much of a stress input, whatever that may be, and this is a key thing for people, is like, it doesn't matter that it's not just like exercise stress. This is life stress, and it's unique to everybody. We all perceive and deal with stressors differently. I did a really great podcast on overtraining syndrome at the midpoint or end of last year or so. And I was like, really just, every now and then an article comes my way where I'm like, a tidbit comes out of that I hold on to forever. And there's a couple. And one of them on the overtraining article that we discussed on Endurance Planet was the idea that the training volume of these athletes experiencing overtraining syndrome was relatively low. I mean, well under 10 hours a week. And intensity wasn't outrageous either. What was the big conclusion was that it was all these other life stressors, work stress or school stress, that when people are, and so just cognitive stress, or mental emotional stress of some kind, that really was like apparent in all these athletes suffering overtraining syndrome. And so it really brings home the point of when we are working with athletes and, wanting to either prevent these things in the first place or heal from them, we cannot just log on to their training peaks or whatever they do to log their workouts and make conclusions based off that. We have to do a whole analysis. And I think, I'm hoping that we're getting into an era where coaches and, professionals are going to be more mindful of these things too, to look at the whole athlete. Obviously, energy stress, if you're under fueling and those kind of things, that's a huge stress as well. But really, I mean, it's a bit cliche in maybe some spaces to say, but the stress is really what can drive us into the ground. And that's, when I described that story about Kona and the morning of getting stung by the jellyfish and still wanting to make it to the Underpants run, for a lot of people, they might have just been able to brush that off as this is funny, whatever. But I was so high stress and high strung at that point. Something like that easily sent me over the edge. And I'll tell you, I have 50 more examples of that, 100 more examples of that easily in that period of time, where things that probably would not be that big of a deal for some people would easily send me over, because I also had poor stress management skills. And, it's kind of this vicious cycle. And so kind of coming back to your original question of Red S, I think it's great that this exists in this world, where we can be more holistic in the way that these conversations and figuring out, pinpointing what it is for somebody. And now let's find the tools to heal. And so if you're the type of person where then you take the next step of doing blood work, for me, I really love the Dutch test, which is it's a urine panel, or you do urine samples, and you get a very holistic look at what your HPA axis function is, along with your sex hormones. For women, if you're having a cycle, you do it at a specific time of your cycle. And I look at cortisol rhythms from morning to evening, and we can conclude a lot based on that test alone, pairing it up with the person and their presentation and their symptoms to then give best recommendations for people. And that is honestly usually in my space and the way I coach people and the type of athletes that come my way, that's usually the place I would even start before blood work, quite frankly, for a lot of people.
Yeah,
Um,
if you can't afford blood work, you can wake up in the morning and see if you feel fried or you feel alert, energized, and happy. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And then, I'm really entering this chapter two of like taking this information that we're discussing right here, really understanding a person and what makes them tick or what sends them or how easily they're sensitive to stressors and the lack of ability to deal with stress. And then really kind of dive into who they are as a person and like find out like kind of the roots of wellness where they're lacking in their life and how we can bring them back to wholeness again. And I'll tell you, Brad, like sometimes people will come my way and they're not ready and they ghost me. Like they're just not ready for this kind of work. And that is okay. I send them off with compassion and love and hope that the day does come for them. But other people,
Mm.
usually speaking, like by the time they come to me, they're ready for this investment. Or they're the athletes that are like, what you say really resonates. I don't want to get myself in trouble. Like, I want to work with someone like you, even if it means I'm not the fastest marathoner, even if it means I end up deferring this year's race until 2 years from now because you think it's not right for me to race this year. I will listen to you. And I'm so grateful to work with athletes like that who have that open mindedness
Mm.
around their race schedule and, changing plans and not being so hard on like, I have to do this race on September 20th, or I'm not going to have any self-identification. Like it's going to wreck me and my life already sucks. So I need to do this race on September 20th.
Mm.
Oh, not doing the race because that's actually probably the better thing for you based on everything you're telling me right now.
Yeah, that's funny. You describe the people ghosting you, and I think it's a very serious point where um, there's a perverse payoff to revving up this high stress existence. And I think anyone can relate where you have the hard driving workaholic person, you have someone who's training to the extreme, even a parent who's mothering like crazy and getting completely stressed out about what soccer team the child is placed on, or whether they have the preferred teacher, whether their math tutor is available on Tuesdays because they have piano on Wednesdays. And, we can all go there. And it seems like we get off on it to a certain extent. Like when you get to Kailua Kona during Ironman week and the energy is so crazy, it's not like a vacation spot that it is for the other 51 weeks a year. It's just total electricity and intensity, and it's exciting. And you meet people from around the world, and you meet all the listeners that you've been podcasting in your little booth by yourself, and then you get to commune with everybody, and it's super fantastic and awesome and exciting. But it's also ultra high stress, and I think it's important to reflect that, hey, there's a payoff. I get off on a certain a portion of this, and then do I want to consider these big questions that you get ghosted on? Like, hey, is there a way to carve in some balance where you don't have to destroy your health in pursuit of an exciting, adventurous, bold, and daring life?
And I think there is a way to have it all. Like I really do think we can have the high stress weeks in Kailua Kona. I think we all can do the marathon. That we want to do. But I think there is a discipline that we need to learn around these things. And most of us, it's not the discipline to be accountable and do more and adhere to the plan. It's the discipline to know when you need to rest and sit back for a minute and scale back and reevaluate the timeline of like how you're expecting to train and race on September 20th. We're using that example. And if that needs to be September 20th the following year, that
Yeah.
there's no shame in that either. Like we all know that you're an amazing person who has the capabilities to run a marathon, but we also want you to be well for yourself, for
Mm.
your family. And delaying that a year to me, like, I'm cool with that. If that means that all these other things are, and so that discipline is hard for many of us to learn. And I think that goes to another, bullet point of like, when you ask me, why did you kind of let this go on for 10 years when you knew that it wasn't necessarily the right thing? It's like, I lacked that discipline to pull the plug when I should have pulled the
Mm.
plug so many times. Like there was multiple times I needed to pull the plug and I didn't know how, I didn't have the tools to pull the plug and say no.
Yeah, because
This
you're
was like most in my 20s and like, yes, all to everything.
yeah, you were too deep into it, Tawny.
Mhm.
And that's a compliment. Like you've dedicated your heart and soul, your time and energy. You're the podcast queen. You're a public figure, and it's not so easy to say, screw this. I'm going to drive 20 minutes down and go to the beach all day. It's really tough. And I remember my good friend, former training partner, the late Don Weaver, when I announced that I was retiring from triathlon and we weren't going to be training together anymore. He's like, "You can't retire. You're too wound up in this. This is your whole career and your job and all your friends and your social life. And I challenge you. You can't do it." And it was such a great, funny thing to say because he was serious, but I was like, you know what? I am going to have to jump ship here. And I have let my career linger about a year too long. Like I should have quit when my buddy Andrew McNaughton did at the end of '93. And instead, I took a whole nother year of my life and dedicated myself to the training when I realized very clearly, because we can time ourselves in workouts, I realized I had fallen off from my peak and I was going to get my ass kicked, which I did. So it was a nice, graceful exit that, where I dragged it on too long and realized I was holding on for all the wrong reasons because it was just my familiar pattern. And I was fearful and, of the unknown that lay ahead when I finally, walked away from being a professional athlete, which of course a lot of my identity is wrapped up in my social life and my daily schedule and all those things.
Right, exactly. And, you know, something you just said too, it's like, I'm down for people to do the hustle. Like, I don't regret the hustle that I put in and the work I put in to get my career up and run, my dream career. I started off out of college with one career, pivoted, made another career, and had a lot of success with it. I wasn't necessarily a professional athlete, but I feel like I had a lot of success racing the way I did in a short amount of time. And so I don't necessarily regret any of that. Would I have done certain things differently? Maybe. Yeah, for sure. Definitely. But at the same time, like, it really was like a ticket to burnout. It really, I was punching my ticket to burnout. And I'm grateful that I found the tools to allow a next chapter after that where I, changed my habits. I still got to race, but with a different mindset. I still am thriving in my coaching business and endurance planning. And now I have 2 kids that I'm taking care of, so I feel like I got really lucky by like finding the right tools to make monumental shifts and still do all these wonderful things that I was doing back then. I mean, like I said, we still went to Kona even when it had a baby in her arms. She was only 6 months old and she was literally at the finish line at the Ironman World Championships. Like, that was a cool moment for our family. And a proud moment for me to think like how full circle I had come after like the years of being like an amenorrhea person at Kona. And now I'm like, my baby. And I'm a breastfeeding mama with like extra weight on my body right now. And I'm totally cool with that. And so I feel like I really wanted to still thrive in this space, but I knew the burnout I had created in the 20s was not going to be the sustainable approach. And so I was like, all right, let's do this work. This is hard work, but let's do it. And now I'm living that. And it is a beautiful chapter to be living in this phase of it all.
Yeah, I guess we can have it all in a certain sense. And one of the ways possibly to do it is just slow the heck down a little bit and not be so dogged about measuring up to outside standards. Like a lot of the athletes that are very serious or like to talk about the podium and have these goals where, they desperately want to be in the top 3 in their age group and get recognized accordingly. But if that comes at the expense of, attending your child's soccer games or helping out around the house, it's like, why don't you just go for the top 10 or the top 20, have a fantastic time, and get a little more balance. And then, of course, I'm voicing this opinion to the most incredibly type A population you could draw up or find on the planet.
But here, let's give a real life example of that. So I think my half marathon PR from like over or 2013 or so was like 1:30, like pretty not great. Like, I'm not a professional runner by any means, but that was like I was booking. It was a pretty good day. I actually ran that with a broken wrist too because I was like, God forbid I broke my wrist, but God forbid I don't do this race that we signed up for. Right? That
kind of hurts. In case you don't know, people. You're
No.
swinging the broken. I remember having a broken thumb. And it was just super painful to run with. I couldn't believe it.
I don't even know, dude. Like, I don't even know how I did some of these things, but I did. And it was a PR day. So that was me in 2013. Now, me in 2023, after being postpartum, like within a year postpartum, and I wanted to do another half marathon. There was a local one here. And not only did I enjoy the process of training, like I felt like my goals and my approach to race day were so realistic because I prioritized what was most important to me, and running a fast time was so far down the list and not important. Just getting myself out running and consistent again, but still being present for my
Mm.
family and finding that balance, however that worked for us. And so as the training process went along, I was like, okay, I'm not that great. I'm not, as consistent I like to be. I got a baby at home. She's breastfeeding, all this stuff. But like, this is going well. Like, I'm getting some fitness back. Like, I'm grateful for this body of all those years of work that I have such a strong body,
Mm.
after having babies. And so when it came down to it, like, I was like, I probably won't be able to go under 2 hours. Like, realistically, I do not think I'm going to be able to run under 2 hours. Like, I'm just not that level of fitness yet. And that is okay. I can say with full honesty, I did not give a crap about that. I was just
Mm.
excited. I started to view my long run days on Sundays, for example, as just like me time, which I don't get much of these days. So it's like, this is therapeutic. Whatever the performance of the day is, I get this time to myself and it's wonderful. And I come back a better person to my family. Race day came. I ended up running like a 1:59. And I will
Wow.
tell you, my heart rate was exploding at the end. It was so hard. Like, I paced well, like as you would want. You want to speed up at the end of a race like that. And so I paced the race very well, ran to my fitness level, but I saw that sub 2 was possible and I was like, I'm doing it. And and honestly, that sub 2 felt just as good as the 1:30.
Mm.
And that's my point. It's like they're vastly different times in a half marathon, so far different. The preparation, monumentally different, the type of athlete I was then versus now. But the feeling of it and like the joy of that performance was equal, if not greater, on the postpartum run, because it's just like I felt like I conquered something too in overcoming that obsessive type A-ness that
Wow.
really brought me down into a negative space of like, you're not the athlete you once were. You can't run a 1:30 anymore. You suck. You're all washed up and old. And who cares about your silly 1:59? I don't have thoughts like that. I honestly can say with full confidence, I don't have thoughts like that. And I don't care. If a thought like that were to come into my mind, I would literally laugh at it and be like, you're out of here. I don't need you. You don't serve me. Goodbye. And enjoy just where I'm at in this life. And so, like, I don't know. And I'm a pretty hardcore type A personality type. And that's been a journey to get to this kind of mindset that I'm describing.
Yeah. I mean, you've done a lot of work, to your credit, because that's a pretty awesome place to get there. And I think it's a great tip for athletes in the older age groups like myself, where the parameters and the standards are recalibrated without my high awareness, and it's just like, okay, um, I'm so far from the memory of my past, and you better accept it because the watch is staring you right in the face. I remember going out and doing a mile time trial for the first time in many, many years. I just wanted to see where I was at, and I'm sure I could run really fast. And I was up on my toes, feeling strong with my great stride, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to be 4:47, just like, one of the workouts I did 20 years ago. And it was just barely under 6 minutes. And I'm sprinting for the finish going, this was my training pace, 20, 25 years ago for, a talking pace under MAF heart rate. And, after a minute of recalibration, I realized that, the beauty and the challenge of pushing the human body, whatever the watch says, I'm still kind of, getting that tremendous sense of satisfaction from seeing what I can do. And yeah, there's some like it's like putting the gutter guards up at the bowling alley. You're going to get a score on the computer, even though if you hit the gutters 3 times and it knocked in the front pin and you got a strike, it's okay. It's just it's part of the fun.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think I love that because you're exactly like aligned with what I'm saying here, is that it's all relative to where we're at. And it's to just emphasize too, this is not an excuse to just go easy on yourself
Mm,
or like give up or just say, well, I'm going to be slow, so I might as well just be slow and, half-ass my training plan. Like I felt very mentally engaged to the training plan I put in place for myself and like kind of my whole approach to it last year. And, it was still pushing myself in a way that was relative to what the season of life I was in at that point. And that was a satisfying, joyful experience. And so I think that's an important
mm.
point. It's not to say like just I'm giving up, it's hard, I got other things to do, I was drinking too much last night, all these stupid excuses that I don't buy into either. I think it's like, well, you know what? Then you need to like step it up and be a little more accountable, right?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And speaking of the podium, I'm thinking of a profound comment that our buddy Phil Maffetone made to me during a interview, and he was talking about, the disparity in finish times. If you go to the marathon and you look at the guys coming in at 2:30 and then the 3 hour pack and then the 3:30 and the 4 hour. And I don't know how we got onto the punchline here, but there's variations in training and dedication. But he said, a lot of that disparity in finish time is attributable to genetics. And so, you can do your best and put in all your training and have the right coaching and monitor your heart rate. And if your genetic predisposition is to be more of a 3:30 person than a 3 hour person, you sure as hell better accept that and be proud and raise your arms at the finish line. And that was a big one for me because when I was up there trying to, climb the ladder to the highest rankings on the pro circuit, I'd go and train with people like Mike Pigg, and he was a freak. He had no sense of diminished energy as a variable in his training. And so he'd wake up at 6 a.m. and go all day long, and then we'd have to race to chop wood for his fire before it got dark. And to me, I'm like, hey, when's my nap time? When's my easy day? I was just a normal person trying to get the most out of my body. But you realize what you're up against and the difference in people's lifestyle circumstances, their genetics, and all the factors that come into play. It really is a vote for focusing on your own, peak performance standards and being proud that you're giving your best with the circumstances and the tools that you have.
Right, exactly. And God bless Phil Maffetone for, educating us all on that and bringing the whole health conversation to the forefront for endurance athletes in a way that I don't think anyone quite has done the way that Phil has. And, I was really lucky that Phil came into my life as a friend, as a mentor, as, an ongoing guest on Endurance Planet at just the right time when I really started to needing to hear those principles and embrace them. And it's like, okay, so we can standardize some finish times, like, for example, like BQ times in order, it's safe to say that if you're in good fitness and you're this age and this gender, you can get roughly this time and get to Boston, right? So, of course, that we can make generalizations like that, but you're absolutely right, too, where it's like, race your race. Like, I saw pretty quickly that I was never going to be one of these Olympic trials, like 2:30 marathon girls, because the more I tried to train like that, the worse my health would get. And so whatever it is, like maybe that upset me for a chapter of my life where, the harder I pushed, like the more problems would surface gut health, like the hormonal stuff. But then just ultimately accepting like good for them for having the right variables, genetics being one of them, to be able to train and race and put out those kind of numbers and performances. Like it's a beautiful thing to watch. I am not one of those athletes, but that does not make people in our category any less if we're, dedicated to the art of it. You mentioned, but the funny thing is like, then I started to realize like, it's fun to chase PRs and times, but you know what else is fun? Chopping wood, like you're saying. Functional fitness. It's like doing, I think people really also like if they're in that category of like late 30s into their 40s, performance still matters, but now we're starting to think about longevity and how we're going to feel into later decades. I mean, obviously you have, Brad, served as such a fantastic example to not only myself, but such a wonderful community of, thriving into later decades in life. But people want to do more than just like run their fastest time. And they realize maybe actually running the fastest time isn't the best thing for me right now. Maybe I should be more functional and have a skill set like learning how to chop wood and just doing that motion and getting comfortable with something like that. It doesn't have to be something extreme like that. Back in the day for me, it was a sledgehammer swing on a tire.
Mm.
Super joyful thing to do. But my point is like I also reached this chapter in my healing as far as like my habits and a shift in the way I was thinking about things of like races are fun. Chasing times and performances is truly fun, even if it wasn't the healthiest thing for a number of years. But also using our fitness to do really badass things in other spaces outside of orange cones set up on a roadway somewhere is really fun too. Like it's really fun and potentially more satisfying in a very like unique, soul-filling kind of way. And so I started craving more of that. And that's, I think ultimately that sort of lended to in our van life journey as we traveled around the country and exploring all these different places and ultimately coming up here to the north, seeing a place like Montana and Idaho and Washington State and all these beautiful states in Oregon and like being like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, the winters are cold, but like, this is a playground. This is literally a playground. There's so much to do here. And I've built this year's worth of fitness. Let me go play in this playground. And I definitely have seen it in that way, even in the middle of snow season like we're in right now.
Another thing I wanted to ask you was the evolution in training methods that we've seen over the years, and having been displaced from actually training at the highest level for a long time. I'm really impressed at the times that today's athletes are putting in. They're just beyond belief fast at Olympic distance and Ironman. But there's also some questions I have about has all this technology really created a benefit to the most important things in my mind, like the stress-rest balance of the athlete? Or are we now just become so obsessed with technology and numbers that we're digging ourselves a hole, just like the uninformed athletes of decades ago, where we didn't really know what we were doing. We didn't have a lot of exercise physiology data. And so we thought the idea was to train as long as you could every week and put up the biggest numbers, and then you'd go win the race. But I'm just wondering what your reflection is on how things have changed.
Yeah. Obviously times has gotten faster, but then again, you have Mark Allen's marathon times from back in the day that are fantastic still and like still hold up against the best, right? And so people were putting together performances in Ironman distance back in when you were a professional athlete that are right up there with some of the best times we see now. Technology for sure has taken us further. The ability to, be more dialed in with training has taken us further. But what I worry about most in this space is the unhealthy relationship / addiction with technology and an overwhelming amount of technology taking away from just the art and experience and process in a way. And so if you're a professional elite athlete and this is your career, that's one thing. Like, go utilize the resources that we have at our fingertips right now. I think it's fantastic and it is enjoyable. My worry is for some of these guys and gals pushing like incredible times, like, will that lend to longevity in sport for them if they're just like crushing it, and are they going to shine brightly for a few years and then fade out the minute to get time? But how long will that last? And how healthy is that? I'm Lucho, one of my dear friends of life and my ongoing co-host on Endurance Plan. I feel like he and I always kind of have like a healthy debate on this idea of like, at some point, if you want to perform well, you have to give up and sacrifice some health. Like, you really can't have it both ways. Like, you can't be the healthiest person and go bust out like a sub 9, sub 8 hour Ironman. You just can't. Like, there's going to be a sacrifice somewhere that's being made. And can you rest and recover from that to get back to it? So as far as like on that professional level, I think they have a team that is helping them implementing the latest and greatest in technology, and not just from a training standpoint, but from a rest and recovery standpoint. Things like Aura rings and everything that's monitoring our sleep are lending to better rest and recovery. Like, it's great. It's awesome. Like, it's really interesting to kind of follow and watch all this. Personally, like in my space, in the way I'm approaching life, not even from an athletic standpoint, but just generally, I feel like I'm feeling like the push, like I'm pushing away from involving too much technology in the way I approach anything really.
Mm.
Last year I thought to myself, like, I have lived with a heart rate monitor and a GPS watch on my body for as long as I can remember. Like, back in the day before we had like everything dialed in one watch, I used to wear two watches on my
Mhm.
wrist, like the regular Timex man and then the PS. And for whatever reason, I had to have two. I don't even remember why it was. And so like I've been slapped on with technology from the beginning. I had wired power meters on my bike that would give me so much hassle before they were so much more integrated the way they are now. And really where I'm at now is like, but what about just like the art of running and like the art of training and just getting better by, manipulating the variables and progressing in a way that, your test, retest. Okay. So it's like, we'll do our math test, which is pretty basic and straightforward, then see what we need to do and see if our math test gets faster the next time or what give, whatever test you want to use, field tests, like simple. And then just simply doing the work to get better without having to be so addicted to the variables. And that was hard for me because I feel like I'm a very like data, like addicted driven person. I'm a coach. Like I'm looking at data every single day for athletes, but for myself, I just feel like I needed to step away from that. And it was a really like joyful thing to do, to be able to just reconnect with my love for sport without it being about like numbers and variables and data
Mm.
and technology. I'll say to this day too, I've never gotten on Strava. I've never had a Strava account because like I just don't want to be in that scene, like with the queen of the mountain, king of the mountain, like, um, fastest known times, all that kind of stuff. Like it's cool and I like how it drives and motivates people, but I also think like the simplicity and the connection to nature and other things are more important to me, And so I don't think there's any right answer. If anybody wants to use the technology to the maximum level, that's fine with me. I mean, it's cool to see these things coming out. But on the other hand, I'm a like simple person where it's like use the technology as needed, but then step away from it. And I think I've had this conversation with Phil too, actually, now that I'm remembering, like from back in the day of like, like sleep monitors and stuff like that. It's like if you're having a sleep issue of any kind, you can implement the data to understand maybe what's going on a little bit more and then, make a plan, hopefully recover from it, and then step away from the data
Mm.
and use the data and just trust at the end of the day that our bodies know what to do given the
Mm.
tools. And that's actually like really what I fear in all of it, is that we're more reliant on technology and less reliant on the fact that we have everything within us, the knowing, of what to do and the trust within ourselves that can exist, but doesn't for many because we're too addicted to numbers. Again, I think numbers are useful, but I think it can be a slippery slope.
Yeah, well said. I think intuition has to be the ultimate arbiter of your training decisions, and you can use all the technology you want, but first of all, it's got to feel right, and you got to feel aligned every time you do a workout. Otherwise, the all the planning and the scheduling and paying good money for someone to help you create a schedule, I know is important, but the ability to make changes on the fly, I think, in every realm, even the experts of business will share that ideal as well. You have to be able to go with the flow.
Yeah. This morning I was reading a book by Dan John. He's one of my favorite strength coaches of all time. And I was reading his book. I think it's like Mass Made Simple or stuff. And he was the section of just talking about his roots of what got him interested in strength training, or just kind of how it intuitively happened for him. And that the program he developed decades ago is still kind of like the foundation that he uses today, despite all the research, just all the technology, just everybody like being experts now. It's still like sometimes like you don't have to like overcomplicate things, and the simplest way is
Mm.
still potentially the best way. And I really like people like him talking about that, because technology tends to overcomplicate things. There's now too much to have to like consider, when in reality, it doesn't have to be that complicated. Can it be more simple? And I've had athletes, you know, thankfully I have this great group of athletes right now, that one of my athletes I've been with, I'm coming up on our 14th year working together, 14th anniversary. Most of my other athletes have been with me for at least 5 years, up to 10 years at this point.
Mm.
And so that's a kind of a special space that I'm in right now as far as coach-athlete relationships. And there's one athlete I'm thinking of right now where it's been such a personal journey for him, and like different seasons have, you know, led us different ways, where there was one season where he really needed to step away from data and technology and training and racing. Like, he's not always been like that, and he loves being connected and dialed in, but there was just a time in his life where he's like, I just need to step away from all of it. And that was
Mm.
actually a year he got some of his best PRs. And I think because the mental of that was so important, like the emotional attachment to the data had kind of like burnt him out in a way. And so like, let's just start over. Let's just like keep this fresh and free and fun, and
Mm.
like let my body guide. You know, we have the right plan in place. I'm training, and let my body tell me what I need to do on the race without it having to be like check my watch and my heart rate and my things every like 35 seconds, right? And
Yeah.
that was like, those are beautiful opportunities to get with athletes when you can see them, like take a step back and see them over time and see that evolution, and see when those moments like really impacted their overall experience as an athlete. And we didn't care, like he had great races, but we didn't care what the day-to-day numbers were for a lot of that year.
Yeah, I'm also going to say that since we're talking about endurance sports where, you know, the technique is not a huge aspect except in swimming, but overall, we're talking about aerobic conditioning with not a whole lot of nuance. So I'm, you know, wondering why we need to, you know, design these elaborate workouts where you're going to push the pedals on your bicycle in a circular manner and try to, you know, put out more watts for a longer period of time. It's not complicated like you might compare to a sport like golf, where there's a tremendous amount of, you know, disparate skills that you need and technique, precision, and so forth. So, you know, we're talking about anything over an hour's 99% aerobic system. So it's not rocket science, put it that way.
But yet okay, so it's funny you should bring that up, because like we all as humans understandably like have this ability to overcomplicate the most simplest things. Like learning how to run faster at the end of the day, yes, there is technique and there is, you know, a basic understanding of training that you need to have, and heart rate, you know, whatever. But at the end of the day, it's not complicated. And how many times in your life and my life, in Phil Maftone's life, for example, like math method is a great example here. The 180 formula is so straightforward. Like there
Mm.
is really like, nuance to it. I mean, yes, there is from the variables that ultimately impact the outcomes, but the training itself is so straightforward. Yet, I mean, I've been on Endurance Planet for 13 years now, and like it's still a mystery to so many of us. Like, how does math method work? You know, and how do I get better at it? And then when I was reading Dan John this morning too, he's like, people just want to overcomplicate something that is
Mm.
so simple. Like they just want to like, I have endless questions over something that I don't understand how it's so complicated, yet somehow people tend to make it complicated. So I don't know why. Why do we do that as people? Like, I
Mm.
don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. More mental engagement for something that's kind of mindless.
And, you know, don't get me wrong. I appreciate every single question I've gotten over the years from people trying to pursue the math method and have success in it, because it's made my mind think critically about all different variables that can impact outcomes. But at the end of the day, like, you're right. Comparing like running and aerobic training to like something technical like golf, you just can't. Like, you
Just
just
get
can't,
out
you
there,
know?
get out there and put in the work, man. Tawny, have one final important matter to discuss before we go, and that's because you mentioned the Underpants run like 3 times during this podcast. So I wonder if you can tell the listeners the origin of the Underpants run and what it's all about there in Kailua Kona Ironman Week.
Well, isn't it a charity that they do? I mean, I know that Rock Fry and Paul Huddle have been leading it from the. I mean, you were around before I was there. I didn't start going to Kona until 2009. But I mean, that was a time when it was just like the good old days there. And I saw the evolution of it change from, right out in front, like on Ali Drive, kind of low key, to then starting behind, what is that hotel right there, where everybody goes after the race. I forget what the
Yeah,
hotel's
the
called.
King K
It's like,
or something, but
yeah,
um,
yeah. But
it's a big run now. There's what, 1,000 people or something, right?
not more. And it's just like
Yeah.
this big spectacle now. I mean, I was really lucky to still be able to go to Kona in like it's where before it changed. There was a significant shift after the Boston Marathon bombings. I remember just the whole production of it. Understandably, again, obviously, making security a priority. But yeah, as far as I remember, isn't it just didn't have roots in just being more of a charity run and something silly and
Well, it
simple?
started with these two old time triathletes, Paul Huddle and Rock Fry, and the inspiration was for some reason when the athletes descend upon Kailua Kona from all over the world to do this great Hawaii Ironman, a lot of them think it's okay to parade around in their speedos. Because of course they're athletes and they're racing in this important race, so they'd be seen in restaurants, grocery stores, hotel lobbies, walking around in really skimpy gear. So Huddle and Rock, in defiance, decided to run down Ali'i Drive in full view of, where all the action was, wearing their, proper white jockey underwear, and did a nice 5 mile run and got a few looks. And that's how it started. It was sort of like not to name any names, but it was a lot of times I think the finger was pointed at the European athletes coming in and thinking it was okay to walk around in a Speedo and sit down at the coffee shop next to you.
And then you add ridiculous things on top of that, like compression socks and kinesio tape and all the other silly things that triathletes tend to do that just make us look even more outrageous.
There you go.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Tawnee, what a great conversation. You're always full of honesty and vulnerability and great insights. So let's have the listeners connect with you in every way that you mentioned, please.
Yeah. So Endurance Planet, our podcast, found anywhere where podcasts stream. That's where you're going to hear most from me these days. That's where I'm most consistent. I have a coaching website, coachtawny.com, I believe. You can tell. I don't even know. I think people somehow find that still. I haven't updated it in over a decade, but it's there. So if you want to get a hold of me, you can do that on Instagram, Tawnee Gibson. I pop on every now and then, but definitely the podcast is where I'm most consistent.
Tawnee Gibson, Endurance Planet, thanks for coming on and have a great day. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bonk.